The sound that fills the plain is not thunder. It is wood under strain, beam against beam, the hard knock of tools on an arc that makes no sense in dry air. Around it, men laugh, children stare, and the old shake their heads. Yet the deeper fear does not come from the boat, it comes from the world around it. In the old stories of the years before the flood, something had gone wrong not only in human conduct, but in the border between heaven and earth. The ground was full of men who took what they wanted. Power had become its own law. And in 4 brief verses near the opening of Genesis 6, the Bible gives one of its most troubling names: the Nephilim. The text is spare. It does not stop to satisfy our curiosity. It says that as human beings multiplied, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from among them. Then comes the line that has echoed for centuries. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. That is almost all. No full description, no measured height, no long account of battles. Just a few lines, and then the story moves toward judgment. Yet those few lines stand like a broken gate in the middle of Genesis, opening onto questions the Bible never fully closes. Who were these sons of God? In the ancient world, listeners would not have heard that phrase as lightly as many modern readers do. In parts of the Old Testament, it can refer to heavenly beings, members of the divine court, creatures beneath God but above humankind. That reading became very important in later Jewish tradition, especially in the Book of Enoch, where rebellious watchers descend, take human women, and father violent offspring. But Genesis itself does not explain the phrase. Other readers, both ancient and later, argued that the sons of God were not angels at all, but powerful human rulers, or the godly line of Seth mixing with the line of Cain. Each view tries to protect something. One guards the strange force of the passage. Another guards the order of creation. What is clear is the tension. The writer of Genesis presents a world where limits are being crossed. In the opening chapters of the Bible, God separates light from darkness, sea from land, day from night. Creation is ordered by boundaries. Life is made to flourish within them. But before the flood, those limits begin to fail. Desire ignores restraint. Strength devours weakness. Human evil grows so wide that even the language of the text becomes heavy with grief. The Lord sees that every inclination of the human heart is bent toward evil all the time. That is the setting in which the Nephilim appear, not as a side note to a healthy world, but as a sign of a world losing its shape. Ancient Near Eastern cultures knew stories of heroes born from unions between gods and humans. Kings claimed divine blood. Great warriors were remembered as larger than life. In that wider world, such figures were often praised. They gave cities pride and rulers glory. Genesis does something different. It refuses to celebrate them. The men of old may be called mighty men and men of renown, but the tone is not admiration. Fame in this passage is no proof of goodness. Great names can rise in rotten soil. In a world already bent by violence, renown may simply mean that power has become visible. This is why the story feels so modern. We still live among people who believe that strength excuses appetite, that public fame can cover private ruin, that what can be seized may as well be taken. The old world before the flood is not strange because it is too mythical. It is strange because it is too familiar. Genesis does not invite us to stare at the Nephilim as curiosities from a lost age. It places them in a moral landscape where domination has become normal. And so the real question is not only what the Nephilim were, the sharper question is what kind of world produces them, protects them, and calls them great. To answer that, we have to leave the ark for a while and walk backward into the first cities, the first blood feuds, and the first proud songs of human power after Eden. Chapter 2. Long before the flood waters rise, Genesis begins tracing a pattern. Cain kills Abel, then builds a city. Violence and culture appear side by side. Human skill grows quickly. Metal is forged, music is made, herds spread across the land, families become clans, and clans become the seeds of societies. The Bible is not afraid to show that civilization can produce beauty and corruption at the same time. A people can learn to shape bronze and still fail to govern desire. They can sing under the stars and still fill the ground with blood. This matters when we come to the world of the Nephilim. The flood story does not emerge from a blank page. It rises out of a human order that has gained reach but lost restraint. Genesis 4 gives us the song of Lamech, a man who boasts of killing another man for wounding him. The boast is chilling because it treats revenge not as a tragedy, but as identity. Injury becomes a reason for escalation. Violence becomes a badge. By the time Genesis 6 arrives, that spirit has widened. The earth was filled with violence. The Hebrew word is strong. It suggests brutality, injustice, the crushing of others. It is social evil, not just private failure. In that setting, the Nephilim fit less like a random mystery and more like an emblem of distorted greatness. The Bible does not tell us whether they were giants in the way later imagination often pictures them. The name itself is uncertain. Many connect it with a root meaning to fall, leading to ideas like fallen ones or those who cause others to fall. The ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament used a word that later fed the image of giants, and that image has remained powerful ever since. Yet the Hebrew text itself leaves room for caution. Massive size may be part of the memory, but it is not the whole meaning. What matters most in Genesis is that these figures belong to a world of fame, might, and broken order. Later Jewish tradition, especially in 1st Enoch, turns the brief Genesis account into a large drama. There the Watchers descend, teach forbidden arts, spread corruption, and produce monstrous offspring who consume the earth. That literature is not part of the Hebrew Bible, but it shows how deeply the problem of Genesis 6 troubled ancient readers. They felt the few lines were pointing towards something larger, a rebellion that touched both heaven and earth, a contamination of human life, a swelling of violence beyond ordinary measure. Early Christian writers sometimes drew on this tradition as well, especially when reflecting on rebellious spiritual powers. But it is important to keep the lines clear. Genesis gives the seed. Later texts grow the branches. If we stay with Genesis itself, one truth stands firm. The problem is never reduced to strange beings alone. God's judgment falls because human wickedness has become pervasive. People choose evil. Societies reward it. Families pass it on. Desire becomes a right. The presence of mighty men does not replace human responsibility. It exposes what human communities had come to admire. There is also a political edge here. In the ancient world, kings often took women as they pleased, gathered households for power, and claimed a status beyond ordinary men. Some scholars see in Genesis 6 a criticism of that kind of tyranny. The taking of women echoes language used elsewhere in Scripture for royal seizure. If so, the text may be condemning not only supernatural rebellion, but also human rulers who act as though they belong to the gods and may therefore consume whoever they want. That reading does not solve every question, but it does fit the moral atmosphere of Genesis. When men with power forget they are creatures, they begin to behave like predators. The old world before the flood was likely imagined by Israel's storytellers not as a fantasy realm cut off from history, but as a dark mirror of realities they knew all too well. Ambitious rulers, boastful warriors, women treated as possessions, and violence that spread from household to household until it seemed woven into the land itself. In such a world, greatness loses its innocence. A strong name may hide a ruined soul. This is why the Nephilim endure in memory. They stand at the meeting point of fascination and warning. They draw the eye because they seem more than human. They matter because the Bible places them inside a judgment story. They are not the triumph of ancient glory. They are part of the evidence in a case against the world. And once that case is made, the story narrows. Out of a violent earth, one man is named. Not the strongest, not the most famous, not one of the mighty men of renown. A builder, a father. A man who finds favor while the age around him collapses. Chapter 3. Noah enters the flood story with striking quiet. Genesis does not introduce him as a hero in the way ancient epics often present their champions. There is no list of victories, no tale of beasts defeated, no speech to rally armies. Instead, the text says that Noah was righteous in his generation and that he walked with God. The phrase reaches back to Enoch, another man who walked with God in a world drifting away. In a culture impressed by force, Noah is marked by fidelity. That contrast is the heart of the story. If the Nephilim represent corrupted greatness, Noah represents obedient smallness before God. He is not small in courage, he is small in posture. He does not seize, he receives, he listens, he builds according to command. Ancient listeners would have understood how absurd this looked. The ark was not a fishing boat on a riverbank. It was a vast, stubborn project demanding time, labor, and public endurance. Every rising beam became a witness against the age around him. The flood account belongs to a wider family of ancient Near Eastern flood traditions. Mesopotamian literature, especially the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis story, also remembers a great deluge and a man preserved in a large vessel. That does not weaken the biblical account, it strengthens the historical texture around it. Israel told the flood story in a world where older flood memories already circulated. But Genesis reshapes the meaning. In the Mesopotamian versions, the gods can seem divided, petty, or noisy in their motives. In Genesis, the reason for judgment is moral clarity. The world is corrupt. Violence fills the earth. The flood is not the whim of exhausted deities. It is the righteous response of one sovereign God. That moral clarity throws the age of the Nephilim into stronger relief. If the famous men of old truly stood for human achievement, why do they not save the world? Why does Genesis not pause to record their defense, their wisdom, or their works? Because in the sight of God, renown without righteousness weighs nothing. The story passes over the mighty and settles on the obedient. That itself is a judgment. Noah's world would have been shaped by kinship, household labor, animal care, seasonal movement, and memory carried by spoken word rather than scroll and archive. The flood story preserves that earthy texture. Gopher wood, pitch, pairs of animals, food stored against disaster, a family enclosed together while the outside world collapses. The details make the judgment physical. This is not a cloud of abstract punishment. It is a world undone at the level of touch, smell, labor, and breath. Jewish and Christian readers have often wondered whether Noah knew the full horror gathering around him. Did he understand the mystery of the sons of God? Did he fear the mighty men who ruled the age? The Bible does not say. What it does say is enough. He lived differently in the middle of a culture that had normalized corruption. He fathered sons. He received instruction. He built. And in building, he testified that history was not controlled by the strong. There is another sharp contrast here. The old world seems to love mixture in the wrong places. Boundaries collapse. Flesh follows appetite. Power reaches across limits it should respect. The ark, by contrast, is a structure of order. Measurements are given. Kinds are preserved. Life is gathered, separated, and sheltered. What violence scatters, obedience collects. In that sense, the ark is not only a means of rescue. It is a small picture of creation held together against chaos. The Bible gives no scene of a debate between Noah and the mighty men. It does not need one. The ark itself is the argument. Year after year, its growing frame asks a question the age cannot answer. What if strength has mistaken itself for security? What if the quiet man with tar on his hands sees more clearly than the rulers and warriors who call themselves great? As the vessel rises, the story grows tighter. The earth is corrupt before God. All flesh has ruined its way. The decree is given. And then comes the terrible movement toward the door. The age of boasting nears its end. The famed men of violence, whether giants, tyrants, or both, will soon face a power no body can resist and no reputation can charm. Chapter 4. When the flood begins, Genesis describes it with the language of creation coming apart. The fountains of the great deep burst open. The windows of the heavens are opened. Waters rise from below and pour from above. In the first chapter of the Bible, God had separated waters to make room for life. Now that ordered world is allowed to collapse back into the chaos from which it came. Judgment is not random destruction. It is de-creation. That matters for understanding the Nephilim story. Whatever role these figures played, the flood is not aimed at one strange race alone. It falls on a whole order of life that has rebelled against the design of God. Human beings were made from the dust and given breath. They were to rule the earth as stewards beneath God, not as devourers of one another. Before the flood, that calling has been twisted into appetite and force. The very category of mighty men has become suspect because might has severed itself from holiness. The rain falls for 40 days and nights, but the waiting inside the ark is longer than 40 days. This is not a quick scene of escape, it is prolonged confinement, a family suspended between a dead world and an unknown future. Outside are the fields where they worked, the paths they knew, the graves of their fathers, the landmarks of memory. All of it disappears. Biblical judgment is often imagined only in its dramatic onset, but Genesis lingers over duration. Waters prevail, the ark drifts, time stretches. Survival itself becomes a form of sorrow. What happened to the Nephilim in the flood? On one level, the answer is simple. If they belonged to the world of all flesh outside the ark, they perished under judgment with the rest. Genesis does not grant them special treatment. Their fame does not buy a separate ending. Their strength does not delay the waters. The silence is deliberate. The Bible refuses to turn them into the center of the story. For later readers, that silence was almost unbearable, which is one reason later traditions expanded it. But Genesis keeps its focus fixed. The world is judged. Noah is preserved. Creation will begin again. Yet there is one phrase that keeps the question alive. And also afterward. Those words have fueled centuries of debate. In Numbers 13, the Israelite spies claim to have seen Nephilim in Canaan, linking them with the sons of Anak and describing themselves as grasshoppers in comparison. Was this a literal continuation of the same beings? A use of an old name for unusually formidable people? The fearful exaggeration of men already inclined to unbelief? The text leaves room for discussion. The spies are hardly reliable observers. Their report is colored by terror. Still, the reuse of the name suggests that Nephilim had become a cultural label for overwhelming adversaries, people whose presence made ordinary men feel small. That after-echo is important. The flood judges the old world, but it does not erase the human tendency to mythologize power. Even after the waters recede, people will still meet towering enemies, violent kingdoms, and rulers who act as though they have risen above the limits of flesh. The memory of the Nephilim survives because the temptation they represent survives. Humanity does not stop admiring destructive greatness simply because one age has ended. Inside the ark, however, another memory is being formed. Noah and his family are not saved because they mastered chaos. They are saved because God remembered Noah. That phrase is one of the most tender in the story. In Scripture, when God remembers, he acts in covenant mercy. The wind passes over the waters. The vessel comes to rest. The long work of unmaking begins to reverse. The flood is terrible, but it is not the final word. Judgment clears ground for a harder mercy, a renewed world entrusted again to human hands. The question is whether those hands will live differently, and here the story becomes painfully honest. The waters can wash the earth, they do not by themselves cure the heart. Chapter 5. The ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat, a name that points not to one neat peak in a modern postcard sense, but to a broader region known in the ancient Near East. The setting matters. Genesis is not trying to place the story in a timeless sky. It roots memory in land, weather, birds, soil, and sacrifice. Noah waits. He sends out a raven, then a dove. He watches for signs of dry ground. The world is not restored all at once. It returns in stages, as patience learns to breathe again. When Noah finally emerges, his first recorded act is not to survey the damage or claim territory. He builds an altar. That response is deeply biblical. The new world begins not with conquest, but with worship. Sacrifice rises from earth that has just been washed clean. God responds with a covenant promise, declaring that while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. The stability that creation had lost is granted again as mercy. But the covenant after the flood carries realism. God does not say that the human heart is now pure. In fact, the Lord speaks of the human heart as inclined toward evil from youth. The flood has not produced innocence. What changes is that God binds himself to preserve the world while history continues toward his larger purposes. This is why the story of the Nephilim cannot be treated as a neat explanation for all evil before the flood, as though removing one strange class of beings solved everything. The deeper issue has always been human rebellion in the presence of divine goodness. The command given after the flood echoes Eden: be fruitful and multiply. Yet now another element is added. Fear and dread of humanity will fall upon the creatures. The relation between humans and the rest of creation is altered. Bloodshed receives direct limits. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Life remains sacred because humanity still bears the image of God. In a world once full of violence, this is not a minor legal note. It is a reassertion of moral order against the chaos that marked the old age. Ancient listeners would have felt the weight of that. Many flood stories from surrounding cultures end with survival and sacrifice. But Genesis presses forward into covenant ethics. The renewed world needs more than rescue. It needs a frame for justice. It needs a clear word about life, blood, and accountability. This helps explain why the Nephilim episode is so brief. The Bible is less interested in feeding speculation than in restoring moral vision. Strange beings may catch our imagination. God's concern is what sort of world human beings will now build. And the answer, almost at once, is sobering. Noah plants a vineyard. He drinks of its wine and lies uncovered in his tent. One son responds with dishonor, two with care. The scene is small compared with the flood, yet it tells the truth about the post-flood world. Shame, weakness, and sin have crossed the waters with the survivors. History begins again, but not on untouched soil. The line from Eden to Cain to the Nephilim age is broken by judgment, yet the bent condition of the human heart remains. This is one reason the flood story has endured with such power in Jewish and Christian thought. It refuses simple answers. It does not say that evil is only out there in monstrous beings or wicked empires. It says that the seeds of disorder also lie within ordinary households. The mighty men before the flood are gone, but the old temptation to misuse power remains alive in every generation. So when later readers looked back on the Nephilim, some saw a warning about spiritual rebellion. Others saw a warning about tyrants. Still others saw a memory of terrifying enemies preserved in old names. All of those readings circle around one fact. Scripture places this mystery inside a broader drama about corrupted desire, violated boundaries, and the mercy of God toward a world that does not heal itself. The waters have fallen, the rainbow appears, history moves on, but the question left by the old world still follows every age. What will human beings do with the power they are given? Chapter 6. The Nephilim remain one of the Bible's unfinished subjects. That is part of their force. If Genesis had given a full genealogy, a measured account, and a clear ruling on every question, much of the fascination would fade. But the Bible leaves us with enough to trouble us and not enough to satisfy us. That is often how Scripture treats matters that can distract from the central moral claim. We are told what we need in order to understand the danger, not everything we might want in order to master the mystery. What then can be said with confidence? First, the Nephilim belonged to the world before the flood, in a period when human wickedness had become great and the earth was filled with violence. Second, they are linked in some way to the troubling union of the sons of God and the daughters of men, though the exact nature of that link is debated. Third, they were remembered as mighty and renowned. Fourth, Genesis does not praise them. It places them near the threshold of judgment. That is the theological weight of the passage. Beyond that, humility is wise. The angelic reading has deep roots and explains why so many ancient Jewish texts developed the story in that direction. It takes seriously the unusual phrase, sons of God, and the sense that something more than ordinary marriage is being described. The human ruler reading, however, keeps attention on social oppression and fits well with a biblical pattern in which powerful men take what they desire. The Sethite view, though less favored by many scholars today, arose from a desire to read the text through the lines of Genesis itself, where family lines matter and covenant faithfulness is often threatened by corrupt unions. Each position tries to guard a true concern. None removes every difficulty. But perhaps the most important truth is the one modern readers are most likely to miss. The Nephilim are not given to us so that we can build a mythology of ancient giants and stop there. They are given as part of a moral memory. They stand in Scripture as a shadow cast by human rebellion when it reaches for greatness without God. They remind us that not every famous age is a good age, not every celebrated man is a righteous man, and not every enlargement of human power is progress. In later biblical history, Israel would face towering enemies again. The Anakim, the Rephaim, and above all Goliath kept alive the image of opponents who seemed to embody overwhelming strength. Yet the biblical pattern remains the same. God is not impressed by size. He looks for trust, obedience, and covenant faithfulness. The line from Noah to Abraham to Israel to David moves forward not by the triumph of the mighty, but by the preserving grace of God through the unlikely. That is why the old story still speaks. Every age creates its own men of renown. Some are warriors, some are rulers, some are builders of systems so vast that ordinary people feel like grasshoppers beside them. Some promise safety while spreading fear. Some make transgression look like freedom. Their names can dominate a generation. Their memory can shape a culture. Yet Genesis asks a harder question than admiration ever does. What kind of fruit grows in the soil around them? Is the ground filling with justice or with violence? In the end, the flood narrative does not leave us staring at giants on a vanished horizon. It leaves us listening for the sound of faithfulness in a corrupt world. A hammer on wood, a family entering a vessel by command, a dove returning with a leaf, an altar rising from wet ground. These are smaller images than the legends of mighty men. They are also stronger. The Bible sets them in the center because they reveal what endures when power collapses. The Nephilim may remain partly hidden, but the warning around them is clear enough. When the boundary between creature and creator is forgotten, when desire becomes entitlement, when strength becomes glory, and when violence becomes ordinary, Judgment is already near. Yet even there, the story does not end in ruin alone. It moves through judgment toward covenant, through waters toward promise, through the failure of the great toward the preservation of the faithful. And so the untold story before the flood is not only about who the Nephilim were, it is about the world that welcomed them, the God who judged that world, and the narrow line of mercy that carried life through the deep. Their name lingers because the danger lingers, but so does the promise that history belongs not to the mighty men of renown, but to the God who remembers.